Live?
Okay, we are live. And this is Senate Finance, Thursday, February 15th, and we're back to take our first walk through. And I'll see if my computer will let me connect. We have a help call for it. It's still saying he can't. Okay, Kirby, go ahead and you can start walking us through it.
Good afternoon, Kirby Heehan, Legislative Council. Would the chair like me to share the screen to share?
That might be helpful because we have a lot of people in the room. When they go home, make sure you see the faucets and the flooring. So the faucets. Technology.
Sorry, I thought I checked.
You're here.
Thank you, if I can share my screen.
At least you're not an old man. If you're an old man, they blame you.
I
You're just sensitive, Senator.
They say you don't know how to do it.
impressive. Places that once I don't, at least I have an excuse that.
Don't have like, waiting for.
Yeah, you can't say
No,
no.
it's not an end. Why not?
But I don't.
Next level.
No.
Next level.
Yeah.
My son.
Well, secret is always you put the hammer next to your computer.
That was my daughter with the printer who would go into dump mode in the early days. And she'd be trying to print her homework and I'd get, take that, take that. Oh, dear. We go, okay. Okay. That's the same.
So pulled up H850 as passed by the House. Kirby Heehan, Legislative Council, that. So H850. Overall, it's the purpose of it is to repeal the homestead tax rate caps from Act 127 of 2022. And to replace those caps with a transition mechanism for school districts to transition to new pupil weighting system. And to provide some assistance for the districts that will have less tax capacity after the transition. So section 1 is a purpose section, which I believe was, by the way, this bill's it's had Dr. Anderson and Beth St. James and myself working on it. So 3 people from most of the council, because there's education policies with tax and there's election stuff in here. So Beth St. James drafted this purpose section, working with House Education. I can read it or we can move on from
I
it.
think we can move on and
Okay,
GovOps is going to be looking at the election voting balloting section. They have witnesses today and if they have any concerns, they'll get them to us.
okay, so we don't have to go into that. By the way, I was asked at the last minute to come into Senate GovOps in about an hour from now, so it may run long enough to take off. So section 2 of the bill here is the repeal that I was just mentioning of section 7 of Act 127. It repeals the tax rate caps and it repeals the tax rate review that went along with that. And section 3 is the new mechanism. Everyone ready to talk about math?
Let's talk about that.
Okay. Subsection A has the Agency of Education for every school district to do some calculations to find the long-term weighted average daily membership for fiscal year 25 for every school district. And then applying the old per pupil weighting system, the one that's for 24. And then doing that same thing for the same fiscal year 25, but applying the new system for pupil weighting. And then in subsection B, comparing those numbers to find what school districts had a relative increase in tax capacity because of the pupil weighting and what school districts had a relative decrease in tax capacity because of it. And those that actually lost out, who had a relative decrease when compared with the rest of the state, would receive a benefit under this mechanism. And that benefit is equal to, this is subsection C here, 1 cent for every relative let me get the word right. For every relative percent decrease when compared with the rest of the state, a 1 cent reduction in the homestead tax rate for that school district.
They get a penny for every percent, right?
This year.
One penny this year for every, 1 penny this year for every percent decrease compared with the state. The range of decreases is between 1 and I believe up to 20. Or around that neighborhood, obviously. My colleague Julia from JFOs would be much better source for that. And there's a phase out. So for fiscal year 2025 is what we just said. And then in 2026, each district that received the benefit would get 80% of that decrease for the next year, 2026. And 2027, that's reduced by another 20%. So it would be 60 and then 40. And then the last year of the benefit would be 2029, where they would get 20% of what they received in 25 per decrease.
Good question, Secretary.
Scott Beck, Representative Beck, sent me a district breakdown of what that was to do. The link that he sent me is now not showing. Do you have a district breakdown of what those percent differences are for each district that could be part of today's posted materials?
I do not have that, but I would ask if JFO has it.
Do you want me to respond?
Sure.
Julie Richter, Joint Fiscal Office. The Agency of Education put out a list of those materials. I don't have it available for today, but
Is that one of them? That was
No.
handed out, okay.
no, there's a district by district breakdown of changes in tax capacity. I have a chart that shows overall, and we can get that from Nicole.
Okay. That would be good to have.
Thanks, Julia. Sorry,
This is a
yeah.
team play. If Senator Donahue, Buster. Yes,
So. To characterize this without. Does this solve the mistake that most of us feel happened with the establishing of a cap that was confusing?
Without recognizing any mistakes, I would say yes, that this solved the problem caused by the tax cap. Things under this, things go back to quote unquote normal from before because the system now has the same checks as it does. It's just that those that lost out on tax capacity due to the transition are getting a reduction. But it's a flat reduction that's not causing the entire system to operate differently.
So just the last thing you just described, have the effect of having this take place not as rapidly and over a longer period of time?
The tax caps were supposed to be over a 5-year period, and this benefits over a 5-year period.
So at the end of the 5-year period, it's the same as it would have been if you hadn't done this.
Yes, 5-year phase out. Yeah.
So the amount, at the end of 5 years, the amount of money that certain districts would be putting into the system that's going somewhere else would be greater. And would be the same as it would have been if we hadn't made these changes. Let me rephrase that.
Okay.
We're taking wrong paper. What was proposed that we passed a year ago weighted pupils in a way that took money from some districts who it was believed had students that were easier and less expensive to teach, and sent it to districts who had students that were tougher and more expensive to teach, more difficult and more expensive to teach. And did that over 5 years, and this proposal achieves those similar numbers over 5 years.
Well, I believe that per pupil weighting is permanent unless changed by the legislature again. So it's that part of it's not over 5 years. That was kind of, I think the idea that there needed to be some sort of transition period of 5 years was to slowly move those that lost capacity to help, to give them some help in moving over this new system instead of all of a sudden having a lot less weighted pupils, and which means a lot less access to resources.
They lost money.
So I think that's where the 5 years comes from, is just to give those districts 5 years to transition.
And when it left here, we phased both up and down over 5 years. The 5% cap went in the House, but they were basing it on normal school spending, which went up 3 to 4% a year. And so 5% cap would have done that. Got misinterpreted, at least, or we didn't make our intent clear, that was the change from the weighting. And so when school spending started going up at historically high rates this year, it was thought that their rates were still capped at 5. Any business that, you can't hold your revenue source, which is your taxes, at 5 and spend at 19, or you'd be broke in a year. And so this is trying to rectify. Your spending will go up, your tax will go up as the whole state goes up or down, which is what we've been operating under for how many years? 30? Close to, yeah. But this year's showed some flaws in that system.
So I wanted to make a comment on the question, if I could. So I interpret what this bill is doing as eliminating the 5% cap, which created a perverse incentive for districts to spend up because they could spend a whole bunch more without seeing an increase in their property tax rate. So it restores the linear relationship between spending and tax rates while also giving them how to reward it. My question is more for the lawyers, but I think that is you. So for districts that choose to rewarn, that choose to go back and rework their budget and then cast it on April 15th, there is ink on ballots that are in people's hands today for a school budget. So my question is, does this language contemplate and consider the circumstances where that ink, then the current budget that is now, I guess, going to be nullified, voters vote on that budget item, that ballot item, and let's say it passes, but they chose the option to rewarn it. Well, what, in that circumstance, is the school district going to be able to argue that budget that they rewarned was on the ballot? So does this definitely address that circumstance?
My understanding is that it does. There's been testimony from the Secretary of State's office about that, and the understanding is those vote, if an article is canceled and rewarned, even if votes are counted, like those are just nullified. They're not going to count. What counts is when they rewarn it and hold a new election. That election and the results there are what count.
Further, if I may,
Yeah.
will those results of that ballot warrant item be publicly disclosed? Will they be treated at all differently on election day? Not that it's a big deal, I'm just curious because I'm gonna get asked that
The
question.
new articles,
The article that's on the printed ballots now that might be nullified, are we gonna treat those at all differently the day of the election?
my understanding is that if able to, The clerks will mark those out, will indicate that they're been canceled. In the rewarning process, there's notices that are put up that this has been canceled. And so they're gonna do everything they can to do that, and there's gonna be instances where maybe that's not possible, like an absentee ballot. Where the clerk can't get their hands on it, and mark it out. Yeah.
That's part of the thoughts. I know, in my school, when we was talking about rewarding them, and mentioned the Sharpie copies. too. So I got the ones that had already been printed. So, yeah. Okay, Kirby, we're not through this, right?
We're not through with the map, but we have gotten through the hardest part of the map. So after the calculations we were talking about before, we're done, how the, and then the 1 cent decrease for every relative percent decrease is applied. There's just a few other provisions here to clarify things. The homestead rate for any districts is still going to have a $1 floor. That's what the sub B does. So there won't be a district that goes below $1 for their homestead rate. And that's something that's in the statute already anyway. And then in E here, it clarifies that this homestead decrease will apply to income sensitized properties. It will be up to the Department of Taxes to come up with a system to do that. They've done it before under Act 46. And this approach is similar to what was done for Act 46, because that also involved a 1 cent decrease for certain districts.
And the original bill, the whole, did not make it clear that income sensitized, one Department of Ed experts to assume it did not include the income sensitized, which is 60% of the voters. So the 5% cap never applied to everybody. If it, we would have had to make it clear if we meant it to, because residential tax is a very limited group of people that pay full income, or just a payable tax.
Yes, that's correct. As the chair said, the Act 127 tax caps, there was some ambiguity around whether it applied to income sensitized properties. So we covered that here, no ambiguity this time. And then the last, for the transition mechanism, the last subsection here just clarifies that districts with an increase, a relevant increase, will not receive a tax rate reduction. That's already handled by the way the math works, but this is just our extra clarification provision here. And that's it for the transition mechanism. The next section is the election stuff.
Okay, and we could go through that. DevOps is taking a look at it this afternoon, but we should go through this.
Before we leave the transition point, I just want to understand this. So the 80, I'm looking at the passed by the House, the 80% rate for 2026. Okay, so a district shall receive a decrease in its homestead property tax rate in fiscal year 2026 equal to 80% of the rate decrease it received under subsection B of this section. So the rate decrease for this year, that district by district breakdown I'm interested in, is fixed. And that's what will be just 80% of that next year and 60%. Okay, so whatever pupil weights actually fluctuate over the next 4 years will not be considered just this percent this year.
It will, yeah, it's in other words, it's based off of the impact between 24 and 25.
And if a district has an influx of pupils, it's just gonna go into, doesn't really matter.
I
that
think,
calculation.
yeah, I think one of the issues here was that these pupil weight had an impact on tax capacity, but then natural demographic changes coming and going as students also impact. So the way that by comparing 25 to by just doing the comparison fiscal year 25 using the 24 way and then 25 using, you at least took out the demographic changes for this year and was able to focus just on the pupil weight difference. And so that's why that decision was made to do the math that way. But yes, as you're pointing out, the demographic changes are going to happen and those things will happen and it makes an impact or and the type of tax rate features.
And follows.
Yeah.
So I really want to see that district by district breakdown because those numbers are fixing those rates for the discount, the cents rates for the next 5 years for all of our districts. If we continue with this, I would just go back to what you mentioned, Madam Chair, and I'd love to. I know we're on a tight time frame. We'll have to move this forward, but did the House fully vet and consider a rolling average of the pupil weights? So as to look at what it was this year in the last 4 years and then use the next year for those, that was what originally passed out of the Senate, but was that just dismissed out of turn or what was the rationale that why it wasn't reconsidered as a rolling average of the pupil weights for 5-year phasing?
I don't think I can answer that because I think it was considered, but it was a policy decision made by, the various chairs in the House that were working on this. I know they considered a lot of different approaches and that JFO presented a lot of information to try to make a decision. And this is what they landed on.
Because our system wouldn't have picked up mass in-migration or exit. And we know we've got at least one town that had an exit of COVID runners that, came in and then left. And their school population was still set at that rate. They lost students because of migration, not because of waiving. There's no perfect way, at least with the size staff we have, that we can, I think, really get to that perfect. We don't have anybody that crunches now.
I don't know. A last comment, Madam Chair. I don't know what your timeline is to get this out, and I don't want to stall it because the communities need to know it. I'm just not persuaded that the rolling average pupil rates over a 5-year period is a better way to do it than fixing it for this year with then just a 20% reduction on this year's difference rate. The rolling average weight would have been adaptive to what each community fluctuates or adjusts for if they start attracting or having major changes in pupil weights. It just seemed like a much more graceful way to do it. So, but I'm not gonna tell things we need to move
I
forward.
think the pressure we're under is that schools need to know what we're going to do. Because they're looking at town meeting in 15 days, something like that. And we've heard that they are changing the budgets until they know what we're going to do, so. We need to get it out in fairness to the towns. It won't be perfect, but I will, have Steve Joy Fiscal can help us, and I'll have you talk to the chair of Ways and Means and ask why they did it that way. Okay, we'll have her down to talk about it.
And that district breakdown is extremely important because that's fixing up to the discount for
Okay.
those 5 years.
And
Yeah.
Julia may have that even today.
I'm forwarding it to Zane to forward to the committee right now.
This is a little bit of a departure from the, sorry, from the language we're looking at right now, but if we're trying to signal, to the communities that after this, we're looking at options for relief in terms of the larger property tax burden and which levers we pull. I have kind of a basic question that I need help answering. If we pulled a lever that had to do with, non-homestead residential, would the towns that have a lot of second homes benefit more from us pulling that lever?
Are you talking about raising the taxes on second homes?
If we did that, does that benefit the towns more that have second homes?
It wouldn't help this year.
Right.
You were asking. Oh,
Yeah. Mhm.
Are you asking if it impacts the school budgets?
If it impacts their tax rate more, if they're in a town that has a high proportion of second home.
I don't think there's a relationship there. between
Okay.
How the non-residential rate is implemented and the budget
benefits
and
of
the
their
money
district,
available
yeah.
for
Okay.
district.
All the money goes to the state fund, in which it is equalized.
Right.
That's, I had this 2/3 of Stowe's tax revenue goes to other schools. I spent half an hour with that the other day. Warren was a big loser when we did 60. They had a 28-cent tax rate and a violent orchestra. And we had schools that didn't have anything close to advanced math. So we neutralize it, and it would increase the money in the funds, which could decrease the town. But it wouldn't have a direct impact on the town. I think the thing I'd like to find out how it could be this year is when we set the homestead, because the non-homestead people were saying, we don't get to vote, we just keep it. It's in our tax. We set the non-homestead rate higher than the education rate. We knew eventually they would cross because school spending kept going up. It has crossed. I know it's crossed in Stowe, it's crossed in Plainfield 10 years ago. We knew we'd have to fix it, but the pain's never been hard enough to do it. I'd like to see if it wouldn't be disruptive to the whole system if we did it this year, because if it would, I'd like to get it done by next year. I don't want to disrupt things anymore. Than I have to.
Talking too much, but what Senator Ron Hinsdale just stated, I'm kind of curious, if we did pass new revenue levers this year, that wouldn't take effect until FY 26. I'm relatively still new around here. Are there mechanisms that we could borrow, take from the stabilization fund to buy down this year's rates?
You've
How we
already
manage
taken
future
the
revenue?
stabilization fund to buy down this year's rates.
Oh, we have.
Yes, there's no money there. We put that in last year. And everything, like regularly, everything has been put into these calculations.
So, we've used the tax rate I've been asked to model using the 13 million from the tax rate offset reserve to uniformly bind down tax rates. The stabilization reserve, which is that 5% of prior year net appropriations, is still at. Sorry,
Would know.
I need to pull that up.
I think, well, why don't we let Kirby get us through the bill and then we'll get Julia up and she can sit up there and do the number. We can all see on the screen, but let's finish through the words and then we'll get to the numbers.
So you would like a quick overview of the election as part of it? That's all we have left?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we should.
Sure. So under the bill, if it chooses to, school district can cancel any article, the vote specifically, the vote on any article that's for the district meeting. And if it decides to cancel that vote, presumably it would be to change the budget and rewarn. If it cancels the vote, it has to amend the warning for its annual district vote to specify any votes on the articles that were canceled. Move the date of a vote for any article for which a vote was canceled to a date on or before April 15, 2024. And my understanding is that they have chosen at least partly to help the legislature know the landscape when setting yields later. And thirdly, if a vote's canceled, the district has to mail a ballot for the subsequent vote to all active registered voters who apply for early or absentee ballots for the district meeting. So that will happen automatically. That piece happened after some testimony from the Secretary of State's office in House GovOps as maybe one of the only potential things that they need to make this all go smoothly. Like most of this is going to be done by the Secretary of State's office through current law. But that was a piece that they needed to make those absentee early ballots sent out automatically. And so for this process, there's an appropriation of $500,000 to offset election costs incurred by school districts when they're using the options provided by this bill. And also the appropriations available if they use Act 1 from last year to move a vote. And Act 1 was an elections law from last year that one of the options under Act One was for this year, a vote could be moved back to, I think it was June 1st. So it's just the fact that that law existed and it could be something that a district would use. We included it as allowable for the appropriation. And then there's superseding authority here that just makes sure that any municipalities that had a charter provision that would conflict with any of this, that's superseded, so that those municipalities can also make use of changing the vote. And that is it.
Okay.
And it was July 1 under Act One that the vote could be moved to.
Okay. Senator Chip.
So it's a very small matter, but I would like clarity on that June 1, Act 1 piece. My understanding, I can love the confirmation that this language means that if CVU, if Montpelier goes forward with the warrant budget as is, knowing that it very likely might fail, when it failed, they still have to rewarrant a new school budget. They will not, tell me if I'm correct on this, they will not have access to this general fund, $500,000 to pay for that second budget vote. They would have to add that $5,000 cost to their school budget that year. Is that correct?
Yes, except for the last part.
Okay,
The 500, I mean, it wouldn't cost 500,000 for that school district in that situation.
5,000 is my.
Oh, no, actually, you were just throwing a number out there. Yeah, that they would not be able to use this appropriation for that.
It's small money, but it will add to a rewarrant vote from a failed school budget if they don't take advantage of the opportunity.
Right, if it's not rewarned, then this appropriation is not good for that.
But if you did that anyway, and it went down, you would pay the cost.
Yes.
So this is to undo the damage we did. Doing this late, we have to allow towns extra time if towns choose not to use that extra time. If they just put their budgets up and they go down, then they would pay the cost of a new election.
We were cautious about that.
Yeah.
They're gonna probably blame the fact that we took the 5% away as to why the budget went down, and that we're not subsidizing it with the school. Just as long as we're going.
They're
I
getting
just
the
wanna know-
same subsidy now. It never was intended to cap it at 5% when you're going up 20%. You can't do that.
That's me.
You have the money to pay the 20%.
This has seemed, maybe it has seemed more chaotic than it is. I've been dreading this whole thing being presented to the people, but if the school board puts out a budget and the town votes it down, they have to have another election anyway. So really, it's no more chaotic than that, except that they might want to pass the budget, the people might want to pass the
Yeah.
budget. And now they don't get to vote for that, they have to wait.
Yeah, well,
Well, if the town decides to put it off.
if the town decides to, or the school board decides to put together a new budget, which because of the things we've done, then we are giving them the money to have the time to put that together. If a town or a school board decides to put out their original budget that they voted back in December or whenever, and it goes down, then we didn't cause it to go.
Who decides to wait? The Board of Civil Authority or the school board?
School board. I believe, at least in Montpelier, the city council has to agree to put it on the budget. I've never got that, they have to accept the money.
So to your point, Senator McCormick, I would just say it is very chaotic on the ground for the school boards.
Yeah.
They have to communicate with the Set Champlain Valley, they have a bond that now it's derailing that and they're not gonna be able to bond in time. So this is putting with their months of very procedural process up in the air. So it's very chaotic for them on the ground. But that's where we are.
Is there any way we can make this less chaotic? What I'm thinking of is we're in a time now where perfectly conducted elections are denounced as having been rigged by the losers. Anyway, you know, and then the accusation gets checked out, and no, it wasn't rigged, but yes, it was, and you get that kind of chaos already.
I think to your
Here, it kind of is chaotic.
Well, if we just didn't wanna have a normal we didn't wanna do anything, we let all the budgets go in. And the projection is we're gonna have 20% tax increase, which will be very chaotic for people. We will have people losing their homes.
Yes,
I'm not sure how long I can pay a $3,000 tax increase.
no, I have no problem with trying to do something about that, and if this is the only way to do it, then we'll have to just bite the bullet and do it. It is so regrettable that we're having,
Yes, it is.
that I'm wishing there was some other way to do it.
Did somebody say when early voting starts?
today, people are gonna
Today.
about today.
We're coming in for a landing that we're uncomfortable with. We're gonna circle around. And then try to land again. Some people are gonna, they're calculating the extra fuel it'll take to make the circle. But I think it's a question, are we gonna land on town meeting day or circle around and do it again?
It's a good metaphor. Of course, we've had riots and airplanes lately too, so probably about credit and landing.
Are we ready?
Don't get
to
on.
let Kirby off the hot seat and really those numbers.
We're saving that. So
We better.
that's good.
But that's bigger.
Yeah, it's conversation. We've got a few more minutes.
Maybe I won't go to town kids this year.
Someone was kind enough to put these on our desks.
That, this town of Stowe, both of those colored pieces, yeah,
And I,
They're on our committee pages.
they're also on our.
and if we're gonna use them, we do. Some of the task capital constructing groups at the next station.
Right now, we are just getting the first briefing as what's going on,
What are we looking?
and then we will
There's a few documents
decide
under
who we
the-
wanna hear from, and where we wanna go.
Were we allowed to explain those figures at all?
We will have, if you would like to be a witness, you could, but I think our ledger council has the same numbers. And that joint fiscal has the same numbers. We will go through those, and then if you'd like to be a witness, you can go up and be a witness. Okay. Floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. Madam Chair, where would you like to begin? There's a few documents on the committee page under my name to reference the different questions. So there's the H850 fiscal note.
No bills tomorrow.
There's the fiscal note. There's some of the background modeling. There's Senator Chitnis. I could request for the district by district breakdown. I can touch on some of the questions that were asked in the sideline. Do you have a preference where to begin?
The fiscal note will probably be the last thing.
Okay.
Why don't we start with the preliminary ed fund and remind us when this all got our attention, and then we could go to the long-term reading.
All right, sounds great. Would you like me to share my screen?
Yes,
Okay,
and everybody can see it.
so the Ed Fund Outlook that, there's an Ed Fund Outlook posted on the committee page under my name. And this is reflecting the fiscal year 2024 BAA. I know that's currently being deliberated, but that won't have a huge impact for the ed fund for fiscal year 25. And then there's two fiscal year 25 columns that I've included. One is modeling that I presented on January 30th to Ways and Means, when they decided to explore removing the cap. I know.
I didn't even notice her.
She moves fast. She's like.
So this middle column here was modeling presented on January 30th to Ways and Means, when the conversation began about removing the cap. And then the final column is for modeling without the 5% cap with this new transition mechanism in H850. And I'll put the latest data that we have available as of February 15th. So I'll first start talking about this middle column here. that a good size for folks? For the committee, is that a good size?
I think it might be a little larger.
Is that better?
If you do it a little, yeah, that's probably good. I want the people on the side of the room to be able to see it too.
All right. So first starting and talking about this middle column that we're looking at here. So this was that modeling from January 30th. This was when we received the updated budget data from the Agency of Education. You'll recall that originally the December 1st letter projected a 12% increase in education spending. With the updated budget data that we had, it was then at a 14.8% increase. So increase in education spending compared to the December 1 letter. So that meant that with the modeling, I was asked to solve uniformly for the average bill change across homestead, income, and non-homestead to be uniform. However, because of the 5% cap, that was no longer possible. All of the districts hit that 5% cap, which essentially meant that absent any other new revenues being put into the education fund or a decrease in expenses, the non-homestead rate would need to be increased to pick up the remaining. So that's why we're seeing here, that at the property yield of 7,103, all districts were in the cap, which corresponded with an average bill increase of 20.59%. The non-homestead needed to make up the remainder of the revenues that homestead couldn't make
With the 5% cap.
because of the 5% cap, so non-homestead was at 22.7% average bill increase. So that's sort of traveling back in time.
Moaning with this.
Who goes home? Thank you.
So the document posted is different for the outlooks, but there's is fine, I'm still following what you're saying, but the high level question that I have is this FY 25 that you have here is based on what the budgets have been to date, but I have two districts in my constituency that are going to take off the option to rewarn, they're gonna cut the spending by, I'm guessing probably about just those two, $10 million. Is it correct that if the districts take the options that we're giving them with 850, likely cutting the spending that they had previously spent up, now seeing the linear relationship, that those yield numbers will still improve when the spending is adjusted in these calculations, the proposed spending?
So, I will say that with a decrease in an expense out of the education fund, like education spending, a decrease, yes, that means that, less money needs to be raised. And with the flexible levers of property taxes, that means property taxes don't need to be increased as much. With respect to the response, potential response to H 850 if it were to pass, I can't speak to that. Because that is at the district level based on budget decisions.
But in general, it would have to be in general, not any one district. If spending statewide goes up, the yield goes down.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah,
Spending goes down, the yield goes up.
that, yes, that's correct. While still living in this world, this middle column here of a couple weeks ago, because every district hit the cap, if spending were to go up however much more, the yield would not, adjusting the yield down further would not raise any additional funds on homestead. So absent any other revenues going into the head fund or a decrease in expenses, the non-homestead would need to pick up all of that. Moving forward now, this is modeling showing without the 5% cap with the discount of H 850, the Fed discount that Kirby just walked through, and all of the latest data that we have available. Not data, to your point, Senator Chittenden, of districts going back and revisiting their budgets. You can see that this is still holding the same education payment to the same level as a couple weeks ago, because that's the latest data we've been provided by the Agency of Education.
Yeah.
That's a very important point though, because if after we pass 850, which I expect it to pass, I expect many school districts to revise down their spending, which could be to the tune of $100+ million, which in my mind will improve the yield, thus overall decreasing the expected tax rate. Is that a fair perspective to have?
I say that all of the mechanics in that are correct with respect to how school districts will respond. I can't speak to that.
None of us know. All of this will depend on the votes as they come in. I think if we could get the increase down to 10%, we might declare victory. I can't ever remember it going up in double digits. And this year, schools have been hit with a lot of expenses.
I'm reading the room to see if I'm talking too much.
I think you're keeping them from having to ask questions.
We're all in public.
Yeah.
You have the floor. You can
Well,
continue until
so
you finish.
I think this is what a lot of people are gonna wanna hear, and I'm just kind of trying to get a read from you, Madam Chair, is do you feel after 850 passes, the next conversations are gonna be about other revenue levers to provide additional tax relief, possibly this year?
We will definitely have tax discussion about other levers. I think we're also gonna have to have some discussions about why this is happening and is there anything in the present system that could prevent it from happening again? Because if spending goes up, you know, and we get it down to 10% this year, that's the new base. And so it's gonna keep going up from there, and I think that's a concern when we want to talk about the affordability of living here. Most people can't afford $10,000 in taxes, property taxes. That have. So we will be talking about all of it. We've just about been through all the H bills I think we're gonna get out. All the S bills, so we're gonna have some time in the next few weeks. Next week, the housing bill, but that will take up a couple of minutes. But we're gonna be working on it.
I kind of to the bigger picture as well. I just imagine Senate Education as having a parallel conversation about the impacts and outcomes to students. I mean, when I look at the Winooski figure, you know, part of me is seeing that is what our intent was, you know, was to take a district that has a lot of compounding factors that require additional support for their students and give them more capacity to spend on the students rather than just lower their own taxes. So they are doing what we've asked them to do, not what we worried about happening, which was they just have increased tax capacity and they don't use it on the kids. Does that make sense? I mean, we should also be looking at how successful we're being in achieving the outcomes of Act 127.
She's fine.
Okay.
You have any more time?
We're just chatting, I think. She's having the time of her life.
She's fine. You're really in here. I'll come back.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
You know, like I think one of the big worries, and there's lots of worries to go around, but was that we would just be helping the taxpayers of those communities, not the students. And when we look at all the districts, especially the ones we were hoping to help with additional weighting, my first glance is that we're helping the students. They are going to be spending more on the students who need the most additional funding to achieve better outcomes.
But
Spending less than other districts on students.
Well, I mean, that's why I want education to be a parallel conversation. We're not the impact committee in terms of educational outcome.
First, we're going to talk about getting through this year's financial problem. Then we are going to talk about how we're gonna, if, and what we have learned, and if any fixes we think are necessary to the system. That will include any possible revenue increases and which you can't make taxes retroactive, general rule, so it won't help this year. And
With sales taxes that take effect July first.
They won't,
this year.
will they hit this year's? Okay,
Well, so we're looking at the FY 25 picture.
Yeah.
So if there were to be a tax or an expansion of a tax that could be implemented in fiscal year 25, then we could book that as the revenue that we're forecasting.
For 6 months or.
so is it a property?
That would, I think,
We
we
get a
get,
full year.
I think it would be a question of the revenue stream itself.
Yeah.
And a question for the tax department in terms of the timeline of
Right.
getting that tax up.
Somebody needs to go to that streamline
Well-
tax meeting to figure out what.
Well, yeah, I don't know, I can't see us taxing things on sales tax, which is our most regressive tax, to raise anywhere near the amount of money that we're gonna need to raise. I think property tax is probably where the most money is to be raised, and fine tuning our non-homestead rate is something we can look at. I don't think we have been told the tax department won't have a final report on that until next year, but I don't expect that they're going to be overly helpful in giving us the information. So we will look at a lot of things, but I think we also need to do a cost benefit as to what we're gonna raise and who the taxes are gonna impact the most, which is why I'd like to avoid a regressive tax.
So to your point, Senator Robbinsdale, I fully expect that Winooski is going to spend up with this excess capacity because I am familiar with Winooski and they have a lot of need.
Yes.
It is unclear to me for all the communities that are benefiting from this formula if they're gonna do the same.
Yeah.
And so they have the other option of just lowering the taxes and that doesn't channel, doesn't direct funds towards the kids that are benefiting their pupil weight calculation. So I also think that the bigger conversations, one, tax revenues to buy down for this rate, also just think about the overall stability ed fund, but the other piece, then I think it was before when you were in the principal's office, I think it was referred to.
That's why I always got called.
I fully, yeah, in such
The superintendent is upstairs.
I fully support us finding ways to revisit the common ledger efforts, because without transparency in how every school district is reporting their spending, we can't identify equity based on the outcomes, measures, and resources that are being spent in our schools on different aspects of teaching our kids. So that's where I want to bring the conversation back to after we get through this 850 correction.
Right. I know we will have somebody, we could have former Pro Tem Tim Ash, former chair of this committee, because we have been, he was on Probst when they were trying to do it. We have been trying to get a common ledger, I think, since I've been in this building, which is over 20 years. We haven't succeeded. I think the only other hardest thing to get is a calendar that matches.
Well, I remember 2004, this issue.
I just remember the softwares have gotten so much better, more mature, so I think if it didn't work in the past, doesn't mean
But
it won't
it
work.
is an expense for the schools and it is a change for the business managers, and change is hard. Okay, Julia,
All right, so moving forward into the far right column, this is as of February 15th, assuming H 850. And not assuming any budgetary shifts. We've also updated some of the categorical aid estimates and reversions. So essentially what you're seeing now is that we can restore a uniform modeling. That's a policy decision in terms of the homestead property yield, income yield, and non-homestead rate, how those are set. But here, for clarity, model them at a uniform average bill increase, which corresponds with a 19.99% across the three classes.
okay, so that's where we are at today without any changes in the budgets. We're looking at 20% rounded up one, property tax increase. And
So getting back to a couple of the questions that were asked earlier regarding the stabilization reserve, and the chair brought up the, current year tax rate offset reserve, which was the 13 million that was set aside last year. So as the chair mentioned, this 13 million has been put towards lowering tax rates. I believe that there was also a question about the stabilization reserve. You see that here in line 34, that reflects 5% of the prior year net appropriations. So that's currently full at 56.1 million. I do want to add that number, those dollars are used for Vermont bond rating. So tapping into those reserve funds to maintain a good bond rating, those reserve funds then need to be filled. That reserve needs to be filled back up again to make sure we have a good bond rating.
and filled up fairly quickly, right?
Yes.
Okay. How much of a difference would putting that in make in the tax rate?
I would need to do that modeling. I don't know.
Okay. I have a feeling do a whole lot if I need 120 million to get it down to 10%. But we could try it, but we would have to put it back. We could be looking at this situation. Excuse me. I don't know what's going on with the frogs in the throat in this building today. I think there were 3 on the floor. But anyway, yeah, maybe next year, if we have nothing, we have nothing, so.
On the stabilization fund, so just for my clarity, we're putting 56.1 into a fund to reach 5% of the overall ed fund, which is 2 billion. So the stabilization fund will have approximately $100 million.
Thank you for the clarification. Not completely. So it's 5% of the prior year's net appropriations. So not the total fund, the net appropriations as calculated by finance and management each year. And that's an amount that's held in the education fund each year. So we can see that in the prior year, line 33, there were 47 million. And there was an up in appropriations in the prior year by a bit. So now we're transferring, we can see here in line 29, an additional 9 million into that stabilization reserve for a total of parked dollars of 56.1 million.
That helps. One more. So again, I know the bond rating is absolutely important on this. I was
Especially if we're looking at the major school construction.
completely understand. We have hit this school clip. And so my question is it a guarantee that if we did anything with the stabilization fund this year, while simultaneously committing to new revenues a year out to stand up that time, would that, without question, lower our bond rating? Or is there some fluidity there that testimony from the treasurer's office might help inform that possible consideration?
Okay,
I would defer to the treasurer's
Thank you.
office.
I know we would have to have a fairly short tail to pay it back.
Yep.
Which means if we come to this cliff again next year,
We won't be here next year.
but it's true.
That's the voters kick us out is what you're.
No,
Yeah.
it's gonna be a different legislature,
There will
and
be a
any promises we make don't apply to them.
That's right.
I should-
Okay.
Mhm.
So. Right now. So we need to probably hear from the department Ed. About what the most important numbers are. Cause. I've heard that we need to get this out. So that schools know it's real. And then they have a chance to make the decision about whether or not to make the cuts.
My understanding is, and I would defer to the department, to the agency of education, This 1954 education payment reflects all of the warned budgets that were sent to AOE a few weeks ago. I don't know if they would have updated numbers,
Who's changing?
because I don't know what that looks like at the
So we
moment.
need AIs who can go through all the papers in the state, tell us what the word is. I'm told that's where it's really good for legislators. You can go through every file and get you what you want in seconds. Okay. All right, so that's our present.
So, yeah, so that wraps up, I think. What I was prepared to talk about with respect to the iPhone Outlook. I'm happy to answer any other questions from this document.
Okay, have you? You sent the district by district to Zane.
I did, and I believe he's posted it on the committee page.
Let me see.
While it's under my name, because I sent it forward, it reflects the AOE's documents that were most recently presented to the House Committee on Ways and Means. It doesn't reflect my analysis.
Okay. But that's what they've got. I'm still playing with my machine that can't load.
This version, which is fine, it helps me, is what I'm looking for, that only includes the districts that came in at a negative effect. The one that I had from Scott Beck, but the link is now broken, had all the school districts. And I've already gotten a few emails from some people. I appreciate this is what I was looking for, but I did love that I could see all the districts, because the other question I have is I'm trying to get a proportionality for what proportion of both the number of school districts as well as the overall budget size of the school districts relative to how many people are benefiting and how many aren't. Because as I try to explain this to people in town meeting, they have in my mind that about 1/3 of our school districts are getting hurt and about 2/3 are getting benefit from the new weights. And so I love this in an Excel spreadsheet, talking to the ether, because these numbers are very important that are going to be used for the next 5 years for all the districts.
Yeah, so I did just send Zane the copy of all of her school districts. And I will say that this isn't my analysis, so that Excel spreadsheet, this was compiled by the Agency of Education. I'm forwarding materials that they have shared with the House Committee on Ways and Means. So that would be an Excel spreadsheet to be shared by the agency.
Okay.
I will,
My W drive where I post these things is currently frozen, it's up, but it's not popping up.
Okay.
So, you give me a minute to try and figure this out.
while we wait for that, I think that this may be helpful to get at your question. This is a chart that I prepared that shows the relative change in tax capacity by district. So while the districts are not labeled here, so you can't see, you know, this dot corresponds with a certain district. It does give a sense of the overall picture of the state, which I think is very helpful. So what we're looking at here is, as Kirby mentioned, the way that change in tax capacity is analyzed for this new transition mechanism is by using the weighting calculation and identification from FY24 and the weighting calculation and identification in FY25. Applying that to the same set of data, the FY25 data that we're using, and seeing with respect to the state share, are districts gaining or seeing a decrease in the overall state share of their weighted pupils in the state? So that's what we're looking at here, is that comparison. So districts, so each one of these blue dots is a district. Districts on the far left, these are the districts that are seeing the largest decrease in their relative change of tax capacity. And over here on the right, we're seeing the districts with the largest increase
And
in
it was 5 or
relative
6
increase. Sorry?
It was 5 or 6 big losers or big winners on. I remember that from last year, the graph seems to bear it out.
I will also make one other note for the astute members who are thinking there's 122 school districts. Why are we only seeing 119? That's because there are 3 unorganized towns and gores that have a rate of $1. So the transition mechanism wouldn't apply to them here. So this helps show you exactly the districts that the transition mechanism and not capacity changes impact.
I mean, certain towns are not listed there, and this is to show us a statewide pattern. But out of curiosity, what are the anomalous towns in that street?
Winooski, always tough.
So that, I don't have that information right in front of me. It is available in the document that as soon as Zane's internet is fixed.
What kind of town, what puts a town there?
So what puts the town up here in the right side,
Yeah.
we're seeing the largest gains in tax capacity. So that essentially means with the new weighting formula. Under Act 127, they're seeing the largest gain in the state share of weighted pupils. So we know that with the change in weighting formula from FY 24 to FY 25 with Act 127, there were new weighting categories, as well as new identification of kids in certain weighting categories, as well as changes to existing weighting categories. So we're talking about those categories of English learners, different grades, kids
So
from
Those
economically
are the towns
disadvantaged
that have been the
backgrounds.
most weighted.
High schools get.
So these are the ones who historically have been the most underweighted.
Yeah.
And with Act 127 are seeing the largest relative increase in weights.
This is a very helpful graph, and if you could go one step further, I'd love to see these dots proportional to the size of their budgets, because my suspicion and concern is that you're gonna see much larger circles down on the lower end. So this also visualizes something that I've been trying to explain in a variety of ways, my overall structural concern with the new pupil weights. The districts below zero here are gonna have two choices. They can increase property tax rates a lot if the voters allow it, or they can cut to the bone, a lot of cut positions and so on. I don't think they're gonna get those approved, and so what's gonna happen is they're gonna just cut spending, which is great, but that's not new revenues, and everybody above the line is now going to just spend more. And so my big concern is that this is going to incent all of those 2/3 of the districts to spend more, while getting the districts that would to compensate and cover that spending, they're just not gonna approve those budgets. And so what we're doing for the next 5 years is driving up spending and reducing revenues. So I don't think we're fixing it with this. I think we are just creating an additional sort of unsustainable path of ed funding.
Well, I think what we found, I don't think anybody here is on the task force. But we were told that no one could figure out any rhyme or reason to the previous system. So this one is supposed to have rhyme, reason, and logical explanation, which I can't give you. But the schools that are losing, the biggest losers were the kids that did not have, the schools that did not have as many low-income students as they were rated as having. There were a lot more low-income students in the Montpelier schools when my kids were in there than there are now. Plus, the population is down.
This is
They're priced out.
30 years.
Yeah.
Wealth in the United States has changed drastically.
Okay.
And it's
I
reflected
can't
locally.
fix that sentence.
So, but that's what's happening.
Okay, but
It's not a
Montpelier
surprise.
was getting money for lower income kids they didn't have. I have a feeling that's part of what was going on in Stowe. Because they've changed over, when did we do the last one, so 70s?
90.
I don't know the exact year.
But it was a long time ago. And so there were big adjustments. The big winners tended to have a lot of English as second language. And they've been putting those bills for probably a decade. And that's why they've got the fight or the discussion, and it got really nasty with racism charges. Was whether or not those budgets went out as a grant, or they went out as weighting. And it went out as weighting, but we don't have any control when we wait that the schools spend the money on that purpose. And there was a chance, there was an attempt to do that for the English as a second language, and it failed, and it got very heated.
I was waiting for Senator Romsdale to come back. I want to expand on something she had said when she talked about the waiting and just addressing in the tax inequities, that the attention should go to using that for better education rather than for more equitable taxation. But the emphasis needs to be on spending. Do good spending that you need.
Yeah.
I would expand on that Brigham, and the Brigham decision the court declined to answer the question of whether inequitable taxing was constitutional. Because they had already ruled on another basis that the present law at the time was unconstitutional. And the reason it was unconstitutional was that the inequitable taxation had implications for education equities. That students in towns that were disadvantaged in their taxing capacity, that disadvantage would reflect in their education. So I think that's a really valid point. But having said that, it also seems to me that at this point, we have reached a point where tax inequities are also, if they're not unconstitutional, they're just disastrous. We have people who can't afford to stay in their home.
Well, we're trying to build some more housing. It's a matter of supply and demand. We had a husband and wife, they got hired in a local school. They couldn't find anywhere they could afford to live and they had to decline the jobs. I've heard that from every business and every social service agency that I've run into. We can't fix that overnight. I was told when I was chairing education, that we were ripe for another equity suit because rich towns might be able to afford a 20-cent tax rate or increase. Poor towns can't. And that, they keep, even if it's 5 cents, they can't afford that much, or, even with the state income sensitivity, their finances are so tight, they can't afford anything else. This is gonna hit those people the most. And we have got an equity in between towns with the resources to be able to afford tax and towns and individuals that don't. And I'm not sure how we're gonna fix that.
Finally getting down just to taxpayers who can't get a bill, the money's not in their bank account.
No, it isn't. I figure I'm gonna be on Medicaid maybe 5 years before I planned on getting up. Well, that's just this year's. Randy, did you have a question?
I do not.
Okay,
I have a lot of questions, I think, before the answer, asking, because I know there aren't answers for many of them.
We know when you're gonna ask.
I really appreciate that historical context and I'm not saying Act 60 got it wrong, not at all. That's not what I'm coming from. I think has done a lot for increasing equity. But I bring it back to what you just said. If we really want to talk about the kids and equitable outcome for the kids, we need to shift our lens and rethink this. And that's where categorical aid, targeted strings, unfunded mandates. I mean, if we're just going to leave it to each district to choose their budgets, but we still want equitable access to educational outcomes, maybe we need to start dictating, you gotta have these, this, and this.
Those inequities derive from tax inequities, but what I'm saying now is that the court chose not to go to the question of tax equity per se at the time. Brigham is silent on that, but that I think we have to look at tax inequity itself as well as its implications for education.
I would like from the committee, suggested witnesses that you would like to hear from. Once we finish this bill, which just sets the rules for this year's election, then we can go into the system as it is. It did what it was supposed to do, but 20 years has passed, and maybe we should look at it and see if we need to make changes or tweaks or throw it all out, do what other states do, which is we tell the towns, this is how much money you're getting, make do. Almost every other state, we are unique. We've had national education consultants come in here. They came because they wanted to see our unique system. I think that was for the second. Right, yeah, system for second Blue Ribbon Tax Commission. We are unique. Other states do not do local control. We just say, this is what we can afford this year. That would be very painful to overturn. I'm not sure we've reached the point where voters would welcome that.
Well, one of the interesting things to look at would be, what are the outcomes? In comparison on a system by system basis. And
Ours
I
are
think
not,
that would be enlightening.
no, I know ours are not what they used to be, and they are not what we would like them to be. And that's another question. We are putting a lot of money in per pupil, and we are not getting the kind of results we'd like. I know education has been working on that, starting with teaching teachers to teach reading, which apparently many of them are not taught.
When have we ever gotten the results we wanted?
Right.
When haven't we ever gotten the results?
I don't know,
Good question.
but I think they're down. We used to be up there. I think in like second and third, we were very proud of our education system.
On standardized tests, we compared to other states, we did better,
Yes,
and we have done better in the past.
yes, we covered it.
But then there were some of those comparisons that made that statement. And then they looked at the demographics of Vermont compared to other states, particularly with the number of minorities, and found that we were basically average when you extend those out.
Yeah, when you
We're
extend.
no better than other states with the same demographic population.
So back to the bill at hand, and I know you want to move this out. For the districts that are below the 0% mark, they are getting locked in at this percent rate for the next 5 years. And so what my mind's going to, and maybe anybody watching this, I'm betting those districts are very tuned into this conversation. I'm curious what fluctuations they might be anticipating, or if any, over the next 5 years, where there is a concern using this pupil weight lock percent change this year for the next 5 years. So I don't know if they're seeing more development coming online, if they have any other reasons why they're closing a school, they're consolidating.
Right.
But I'm curious, because this is very fixed how we're currently proposing it on this percent change between the two calculations this year for the next 5 years, that I'd love to know from these districts that are gonna be locked in, if they are anticipating concerns. We can change it next year.
I mean,
if
you
we-
would have to have a large influx of English as second language. I know we have small schools where a family comes in with 2 or 3 special needs kids, has a major impact on their budget, especially those that tuition, and these kids need to be tuitioned. Just development wouldn't change this. Development would give you more taxpayers if you were building more housing. You right on that?
Yeah, so if I may add another, a little bit more context, I do want to reiterate, that one consideration of this is, we're only talking about the transition mechanism. We're not talking about waiting and, sorry, not waiting, holding a school district's weighted pupil count the same over the next 5 years. Instead, really what this is doing is trying to parse out the change in tax capacity corresponding to the discount. It is a policy decision if that is what you're trying to do. And I just wanted to clarify, because I don't know if I had clarified it yet, that this is solely talking about holding it constant to calculate the change in tax capacity, but all of the other weighted pupil changes will be calculated
So if
on
you
2027 each year.
you get an influx and we have a family locally, we had that adopted children that were developmentally delayed. I think that's one of the reasons we did the small school grant, because it ended up a quarter of the population had a learning disability. If that happened and you got 2 or 3 families that moved in a bigger district with special needs kids, their weighting would go up according to that, their present weighting. And that would we're just holding basically it's the people that lost taxing capacity. We're phasing that loss in, but anything that happened above that loss would get counted.
Yeah, so we're thinking about sort of two different pieces here, both which fit into the calculation of property tax homestead rates. So there's 2 pieces that we're talking about. One is that homestead property tax, and that's calculated by taking the education spending of the school district. Divided by its long-term weighted ADM to give us the spending per pupil, and then that's divided by the statewide yield. And that is the homestead property tax rate of the district. So that's where those weighted pupils fit in each year. And with changes in long-term weighted ADM, FY 26, FY 27, FY 28, those will be adjusted in that homestead property rate calculation for the district. And then in H 850, in this bill, we're talking about a discount factor that will be applied to those property tax rates.
Right.
And here we're talking about how is that discount factor calculated? And what the House decided to do was to calculate this relative change under the two different weighting formulas using the same data in attempts to calculate the percentage change in tax capacity.
Okay.
I hope you can answer this. Imagine one of these under the 0% goes through a reappraisal. So I'm gonna go back to my city council days in South Burlington. When we reappraised all of our houses in the community, our tax rate previous with that previous rate was like $2. I don't know, I gotta get the numbers right, but it was much higher. But then when we reappraised, we went from like 2 billion to 3 billion and the overall rate went down.
Yes.
So my question is, if it's locked in at this rate and somebody reappraised this time, it's a fixed number of cents, percent on the cents from this year. Would that be a way to game the system that they want to reappraise, or is the CLA going to adjust for that?
So these cents are applied before the CLA. The district tax rate is calculated, it's called, we refer to it as equalized tax rates. That's at the district level based on the spending per pupil divided by the yield. And then this discount, these cents are then subtracted off of that equalized district homestead rate. And then those district rates are then prorated out to the towns that send kids to those districts. That's where the CLA is applied. In calculating the yield and the equalized rates, the CLA, all CLAs across the state are included in the modeling. Like when we're looking at the Ed Fund Outlook, in my model, I have the CLAs of all of the different communities included in that to ensure that the right equalized rates are being set, that the CLAs are then accounting for how they vary from fair market value.
So in that scenario, with a revenue neutral reappraisal, where that would effectively lower the rate, how do you see that factoring into this fixed cent discount over the next 4 years? Having a non-factor, so if they are, take a district, one of my districts, 13 cents. 13 cents next year, they're gonna get 80% of that, 60% of that, 40% of that, whatever that is. But if they reappraised halfway through that, and all the properties were then recalibrated, would that, then their overall rate per.
That should be equal.
Should be equalized?
Yeah, good, come back to it.
Right, because this is pre-CLA.
So this is only the impact of the weighting. If you get new students, if you get new housing or businesses to tax, this is just phasing in the impact of the CLA, which is the number of towns down there who lost a lot. They tend to be wealthier towns because what tended to change was waiting for low income and waiting for English as second language with it, and rurality.
It depends on whether the extra tax rates you're getting from the new development go to pay off your TIFs or go into
Yes,
the strong box.
it's all different factors, but this is just phasing in. If your spending goes up 50%, your taxes are going up accordingly, except for that little corner that you discounted. And if you do get a big development in this 5 years, would that, say you're getting a 3 cent decrease, that It's not 3 cents off the original tax rate, it's 3 cents off your new tax rate with your high spending, or 3 cents off your lower because you've got more revenue coming in.
So, the cents, yes, those are fixed over the next 5 years, decreasing by 20% each year. Regardless of what those future tax rates are. And you reminded me, I did want to come back to one of the questions when I was sitting on the side, to clarify that. The conversation was, if a town or a district has a large proportion of non-homestead. And a smaller group of homestead, how that would impact their homestead. And because it's a statewide system, it doesn't. Because it's a statewide system, if a district has 10% homestead or 90% homestead. That breakdown of their town's grand list for the statewide education property tax will not impact their homestead rate calculation, nor their non-homestead rate calculation.
Okay. Run along.
So I think I just heard one thing and I just trying to understand this more, but if a community now builds a bunch of houses, maybe that draws in more people, but what's really gonna help their calculation is more pupils. Both any type of pupils, and then some pupils more than other pupils. Because the more pupils they have, the better their, lower their, that's the denominator, which drives down their cost. Is that right?
Exactly, when holding all else
More
equal.
kids.
We need more kids in the schools.
So before the big change 20 years ago, towns deliberately zoned to not have any more pupils, to keep them out of town.
Correct.
The
And now-
state actually proposed that.
Pardon?
The state actually went around, you said in Montpelier, when we told to build housing, you had to build a $300,000 house, which would be equivalent to to $1 million house today. And we told them, if you build more houses, you're gonna have to build a $300,000 house to pay for one kid in school. So don't build housing. We've had a little problem with this.
So
We did.
So I don't say this tongue in cheek, but one thing communities can do is become even more kid friendly and starter home friendly for growing families. To help the numbers.
That's what we need.
That's a very big question and not easy to do, but.
No, I mean, it's smaller towns that are poorer. And they're the ones that have a hard time raising the money, even with all the equalized rates in the state, even without 60. Okay,
come on the ground.
I don't feel like we've gotten off first base.
That was all the thing.
We gotta
I'd like
stop.
to vote
you know.
this out, but we can wait till next week. The House did have more time, but I know the schools need to know what the rules are for this year. And then we can start working on what, if any, changes we want to make to the system as a whole. But we don't have time to change the system as a whole before towns have to do their budgets and their votes this year. So do we have any questions for Julia?
Did you want me to quickly present the fiscal note? Or
Yeah,
not?
no, that's fine.
Okay, so this is like. Also posted under my name, this is the fiscal note for age 850. We've already talked about the bulk of this and you had the walkthrough with Kirby. So I'll stay very high level unless you want me to dive deeper, but essentially we can't estimate, as I've spoken about, the overall fiscal impact of age 850 to the education fund in FY 25. And that's for two reasons. Really one reason, we can't estimate the impact of repealing the original transition mechanism, right? Because of its complex circular nature that we spoke about, as well as we can't estimate potential behavioral shifts of school districts and budgets.
So we don't know the budgets, we don't know what the taxpayers will do, and until we get those numbers, we can't generate any numbers.
Right, when all else is equal, So that's assuming nothing else changes, and the only thing that changes is there's no 5% cap, right? We can't estimate the repeal of the 5% cap, if there were no 5% cap. And then we were to put this discount transition into place, that would cost the education fund $30 million. Which, as the committee is aware, would require the yields, the homestead yield and or the non-homestead uniform rate to be adjusted. So overall, unclear estimate, or JFO can't estimate the fiscal impact of the ed fund. And then there's also the $500,000 appropriation from the general fund for the
Extra fuel going around.
precisely.
That's right. And is that 500,000 is in the BAA, right?
I'm not sure, you need to ask your colleagues across the hall.
Okay, I know they got told like 2 weeks ago. They were coming up with the money, but I don't know where they put it.
I think currently, at least on the House side, it's in the bill.
Okay. Yes, it's in this. Yeah. Okay, but I didn't say no, so. Okay, any other questions for Julia? Okay, if not, we have one member of the audience who wanted to explain, I think this,
Just witness, yeah.
yes, whoever wants to come up.
Scott.
There's a chair over there.
Okay.
I got a witness. I used to have to sit on one myself. Okay.
You know, we haven't had access to.
I need you to sit in the witness chair and just introduce yourself, your name, and who you are, who you represent.
My name is Fortune, I'm a.
Sit down.
Another chair.
Okay.
I'm a red eye.
Like maybe
So-
comfortable.
I have.
We like to be nice before we shoot them.
So I'm Pookie, I'm a resident, so I have two elementary age children in the system. I'll just give you a quick background and I'll go to the chart. We moved here a few years ago. We're a dual income household. We do the kind of family that Vermont wants to attract. We are struggling right now with thinking about how we will stay in a state like this. We are long-term renters. There is nothing in stone. We are facing an affordability crisis. Every home that comes on the market is scooped up by second homeowners. You can't compete. There's no regulation in place. We don't have neighborhoods anymore. We have short-term rentals everywhere. So there's that part of it. And now on top of that, we look at buying a home, we're thinking, can we even afford a home? Why would we buy a home here? We have these property tax increases. It would be insanity. And then looking at our schools about to get demolished. We live in a town that I don't think we're getting our school budget passed. We just couldn't pass a $30 million bond. Our schools are falling apart. They're not safe. I mean, literally, we can't do basic safety repairs to middle school and high school. And there's a lot of retirees barely hanging on and stuff who are on fixed incomes and their housing prices about their valuations going way up, and they're not gonna be able to pay the property taxes. So they're gonna leave. And then we have more millionaires and billionaires coming in and we don't have a town. So that is the background. We have amazing schools, we have amazing teachers. We've cut to the bone and stuff. We are not lavish. We are not spending excessively. If you look at the Excel sheet that shows you the towns and their spending, so it's down at the very bottom. We have made good with very little. So all the way down here, you see our poor people snack. And we have kids, we're still coming out of COVID, we have kids that are throwing desks around classrooms that have full-time aides, like there are huge mental health issues, we have learning loss. And it's not just Stowe in this situation, Montpelier's gonna get crushed, Colchester's gonna get crushed, a lot of towns on the back of this, and 127 isn't the problem, but it's adding gasoline to a fire. We can't clear it. So I think from a Stowe perspective, the school district last night, the school board held an emergency meeting. They voted to change the budget. It's a decrease, but it still keeps our taxes up at like a 27% increase. Because if we went down to keep it under 10, we would have to fire about.
We have to cut just shy of $4 million out of a $17 million budget.
So and I
Almost
think,
a 1/4% of the budget would have to be reduced to achieve a 10% increase in our property.
and we're worried that school budget's not gonna pass, and then we're in a real pickle. Anyway, so that's for the broad strokes, and I think the overall picture, we just need to get ed spending under control. There's no oversight now. We lived overseas for 20 years, excellent schools. We were in Connecticut for a hot minute. Great schools. We've been very happy, but the test scores are not great, right? And we have no visibility into how schools are performing across districts. So you keep pouring money into a broken system, and then the schools that are getting the most. So we're looking at Winooski here. From last year, 27,000 per kid. They're about to go up to $40,000. These are elite private school levels per child with no strings attached. And we don't know where that money is going to go. There's no accountability. Is it actually going to go to the kids? Is that money being used widely? In the updated and HB 850, the budget review has been eliminated. So that means that people can spend with wild abandon now, like they've gotten rid of, you can speak to that piece more broadly. So but this demonstrates what we're doing year on year. Here's Stowe. 20, I see, Stowe, 19,000, okay, per pupil. We're gonna go up to 21, very modest increase considering where we've been with inflation costs. But here's our taxes. We're going down from here all the way here. Here's Montpelier about to get crushed as well. So this was just a small sample size based on the data we had. So I beg you to please take a look at this and take a look at the Excel document. There are a lot of unintended consequences going into HB 850, and I feel like there's got to be a rework. And you have to relook at Act 127 because equity is noble. Everyone wants it. Can we afford it? Who pays? And how does it play out? So that's all of it.
I think what we know is that we cannot afford our present system of very small schools. That we tried to do mergers, Stowe got out of their merger or created something so you're separate.
But we still share all our resources, so not, so with more schools gonna get crushed too, and Elmore, and they're really struggling. So we still share our resources with them, even though we have our own school board.
Other states have they have one big school building and they put half the population, probably all the school population of Vermont, into one big educational campus. We can't do that, but our very small schools with 34 kids in 5 grades or 4 kids in a curriculum, a kindergarten class is very expensive. And we want to do the best we can for the schools. But I live in Montpelier. I'm not sure I can afford $2,000 increase from the schools, and the city will probably put another $1,000 because it's lost revenue with the flood. That's my new base. I'm going to end up paying more in property taxes than I'm paying for my house. I know there's a lot of people in Stowe that are like that, but we need help in trying to get some kind of size that you can get some economies of scale. And we've had a hard time doing that.
I'm Tiffany Danza. I'm a Stowe resident, but I'm also the chair of the Stowe School Board, and I served as a school board member since 2017. I put myself second to Julia Victor as knowledge of this system, but as a very close second. I have a very, very integral knowledge of the system and how it works. So I couldn't agree with you more. Vermont has too many schools that are too small. I do not believe Stowe is one of them. We have 800 plus students in our school district. I think that is a reasonable size district.
12th grade?
Yes, in 12 grades. If you want to look at small schools, you're going to look at Cabot, you're going to look at Craftsbury, you're going to look at Roxbury. I mean, those are small schools. Okay, so the issue that we have is that the education spending in Vermont is more than can be sustained by the tax base.
Yes.
Right? We all agree. The question is, how did we get to this point? If you look pre-Act 60, which I can see a lot of people have been here a long time, and they know this historically, ed spending has gone unchecked since Act 60 passed. And the reason is because upon that passage of Act 60, voters are disconnected from the budgets that they vote on. And this has only gotten worse and worse as demographics and living situations has changed over time in Vermont. So in Stowe, we have 50% of our tax base pays on income sensitivity levels. Both homestead payers and income sensitivity levels are affected by budgets that have passed. But it is much more clear to payers that pay on homestead value what that increase is on their tax base. So in Stowe, because of our numbers, we have high accountability for the spending in our school district. We have dilapidated school buildings. They are the exact same as when I went through them. Nothing has changed. We tried to pass a $40 million bond in Stowe to do repairs. It was not extravagant. It wasn't a new school buildings. It wasn't it was to fix things. And we couldn't pass. It failed miserably. And it's because there's a very direct correlation from the voters to the tax. Now you look at a city like Burlington. Burlington passed a $165 million bond to build a new school, which is gonna cost $210 million. I don't know where that spread comes from, but anyway, they passed 100 and they passed it overwhelmingly. Why can they pass it overwhelmingly? Because the majority of the people voting on that budget are not directly affected by that tax increase that bond is gonna cost. This is a major problem, and that is the biggest flaw with our funding system. We have to reconnect the voter with their budget. How can you do that? You can take the non-homestead tax base and you can split it appropriately into residential use and non-residential use. The non-homestead tax rate should be held for businesses and businesses only. There should be another category for second homeowners and short-term rentals. And those are mostly out-of-state owners. There should be a higher tax rate put on that. We could collect more revenue. And then there should be another category that is for long-term renters, because that is going to be a demographic that continues to grow. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's great for the state. It provides a lot of flexibility for people to move. It provides a lot of other securities for people. The renter rebate program is completely outdated. You have to make less than $40,000 for a household to be eligible for any kind of renter's rebate. If you're making less than $40,000, most areas of the state, you are not sustaining the rents that are required. So that system is not
to a
acceptable.
new system where you get a rent based on the average rent in your area. We did a lot. I'm not sure about the $40,000 income. I think it's
That's the
usually.
threshold.
Is
I'm
that the
1,000%
threshold?
positive.
Okay, because it's usually based on the median income in your area. So we'll check with the tax commissioner and make sure.
Yeah.
Put in place.
It's just.
They've never been updated from what I've seen.
Oh, no, it was updated.
It was
2 years
updated
ago.
and substantially changed
Oh,
by the administration and tax department, a
3 years.
couple of years ago, and it's just recently taken
okay,
place, and it's.
okay, then I will be in error.
And we haven't been updated.
Okay,
So
I can
don't
be-
feel bad about that.
So that leads us to what we have in front of us. Act 127, I don't believe was good legislation. I'll tell you right that from my standpoint, it was not good legislation. It was not well thought out. It was not modeled properly. It's also based on old information. It's based on information from 2019, which I believe is now outdated because of the changes that Vermont has seen in the last 5 years. So now here we are, we're living under Act 127, and now we have proposed legislation that has amendments to it. It repealed the taxes, but it also repealed the tax rate review process. And I think that was intentional, and I think it's upsetting. It was the only shred of hope that there was any level of accountability on excessive spending by school districts. So that leads me to what's in front of you now. So what is in front of you now, these tax credit scheme, it is what it is. I don't think it's gonna help enough. I don't think there's any evidence that this amended bill is going to drive down or mitigate any of the property tax increases that we're gonna see. There's no evidence. So the lever that you have in front of you today, I believe, is to put a cap on ed spending. If you put a cap on ed spending of 10 to 15%, which is still fairly high, you will slow down the growth of overall education spending. You will increase the yield immediately this year, and that will in turn have the effect of driving down homestead tax rates. That is the only option that I believe the legislature has to do any kind of mitigation this year. This problem is going to continue to be a problem. It will be, if nothing is done, like what I'm referring to, there will be a crisis next year. There will be another crisis, and this is going to be an ongoing crisis situation. And there's no evidence that what's in front of you right now, if you pass it through, is gonna have any effect on lowering homestead taxes. I beg you, I implore you to add to this bill before it leaves your committee an education spending cap. 10 to 15%. On my calculations, if you put a 10% cap, you would reduce overall spending by over $100 million in the ed fund based on the budgets that have been presented to date.
I think you're right. I've been writing people in this show who have written me that I think, however, that when the bill left here, there was no 5% cap. So I think when they were looking at 2019 data, school spending has been going up 3 to 4%. And suddenly it's done this jump for a lot of reasons. School boards are under pressure. But the 10% cap started to be the problem. It was never supposed to be a 5% cap on your total spending. When it was 4%, that meant you couldn't get more than 1% a year for 5 years, or you could phase it in.
I'm talking about a cap on education spending,
Yes, and
which is
that's-
the first number of a budget when you look at a school budget, not the rate, not the
Right.
tax rate, yeah.
No, I think we've been trying for years to tell schools, give voters some idea as to if you vote this budget, this is what will happen to you in all probability. We put stuff on ballots, we pay the sponsors, haven't done anything. And then we sent first letter, which is supposed to tell you if you vote the way your school budgets look like they're coming, you're gonna see an 18% increase. I think, yeah. I'm
You can't take away local control,
No.
it's never gonna fly.
No, it
The
won't.
reason we all live here is to live in communities where we have some local control of what's going on within our lives.
But capping it does limit your local control.
It does, and though there's many things that are limiting our local control, but I don't pretend to think we have local control. But we do have some local control over how we spend. And if you're jumping to the conclusion of issuing districts the amount to spend, I mean, that was the original at 60, was the block grant.
Yeah.
And it didn't work.
No.
In year one, everyone knew this isn't gonna work, so we can't go back there. You need to give the discretion to towns and school boards to do what they know is best for their students. But what you do have control over is excessive spending. And if you put a 10 to 15% cap, I would recommend a 10, it will slow the growth of the ed spending down. And places like Winooski that need to get more money into their school, they can still do it, it's just gonna happen a little slower. And that is the only way to mitigate the homestead property tax crisis that we're facing right now. What's in front of you does not do it, and there's no evidence that it will.
I think we know, we need to deal with the imprecise wording of 127 when it went out. And let schools know that it was never meant that you could spend 20% more, your tax rate would be capped at 5%. That's financial suicide. And let schools adjust their budget, because we had a lot of schools say, well, I'm capped at 5 and I have to report to the state at 10, so I can spend 9.9 and only.
No, I know,
get charged.
I'm well, right,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so we need to correct that perception, and then we're hoping schools will hear the message and vote it down.
But don't just hope for it.
No, I
Look at
think-
the Excel spreadsheet and look at the percentage increase in FY 24 to FY 25 by district.
This is the Excel that looks up all
Yeah,
of our.
that's the one that.
If you put a cap on it, it will, quote unquote, it'll put a damper on the fire that is raging in the state.
If
It is the only thing that will.
If I do that tomorrow, I've got schools, a school is looking at 24% increase. Can they redo their budgets in time to do? I mean, because it's not just me, it's
Yeah.
gotta get through all here and it's gotta get. the
We've had 2
governors.
emergency school board meetings, these guys have been working around the clock, we've had community meetings, like. It can be.
We have
done.
rewarned ours. We are no longer gonna vote on our budget on town meeting day. We have taken out the money that we put for necessary repairs of $1.5 million out of our budget.
Yeah.
So that we could get our spending down to 10%.
Percent of the teaching
And
position.
we have finally.
And that's still gonna result in a 27% increase in property taxes in our town.
We have gotten our facilities report that people have been waiting for, I think 5 or 6 years. We know we have a bill of 300 and it's 320, it's over 300, it's about $350 million in urgent health and safety repairs that need to be done in the school. We have no idea where we're gonna get $350 million, but we know we've got a problem. We'll have to look at our bonding capacity, but I think for schools, if we do local bonds and we put them all together and put them through the bond bank, we can get you a lower interest rate. But I don't know if that would help Stowe, and I'm pretty sure it wouldn't help a lot of the other smaller, poorer schools, so we're looking at that. We can think about the 10%. That might make it harder to give schools.
It'll just happen slower.
Okay.
It will dampen the fire that's burning. And I promise you that I'm not here from a Stowe-centric standpoint today. I'm not. We've lowered our budget. We've got our under control, what we think we can get past. We'll see how it goes. We are willing to only put our education funds into our learning. And we are willing to have our kids in dilapidated buildings. That's how we've operated and that's how we'll continue to operate. But I'm looking at this from a statewide perspective. And if ed spending is not gotten under control, and this is, you have the opportunity now, it's the perfect opportunity now to do it.
Okay, Senator Chitton.
So it might be a segue for you, Madam Chair, and thank you, that was very helpful testimony, but I would but I'm interested, I know you have a pressured timeline to move this along. I'm very interested to hear from maybe the House some more on, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot. On why the 10% review was removed. It seems like it has merit, the keep that trigger there. Again, not putting anybody on the spot, but it would be useful to understand that rationale if this committee is considering
Yeah,
bringing the
we will
10%
get that. I
review.
think the 10% was there to make sure that we didn't have an outlier who, because of the new weighting, was seeing over a 10% hit on their budget. They got interpreted a different way, and I think maybe with this, they didn't feel, because you're just getting a tax thing, it's not based on increasing the budget. That it wasn't that, but we will ask, and it may well, I have been thinking that seemed to keep spending under 10%. And maybe we, for some schools, that was a big increase. We might be able to do that and do it.
Can I just clarify for Senator Chinton? The 10% was a 10% per pupil spending increase.
Trigger
So
review.
it was, yeah, so if your per pupil spending increase from FY 24 to FY 25 exceeded 10%, you were gonna be dumped into a review process that wasn't, it's still not solidified, but they're working
It
on it.
never was, and I guess we
The
did have a.
But yeah, the 10% I'm talking about is on ed spending, not per pupil spending, overall ed spending, which is the first line of a school budget.
Okay,
Before revenues, before carry forwards, before ed spending.
I want to apologize, but I'm expected to chair.
Oh, no, please, you don't have to apologize.
Okay, fine.
I'm so grateful for you allowing me to speak today. I really appreciate
thank you
it.
very much. I appreciate all Stowe's effort and input that's driven me ragged and go and the Sergeant at Arms office, the pages would come laughing with piles of phone messages. I have tried to at least answer the emails. But it's been helpful to have a school trying to work with us and getting the insight from your perspective is helpful.
Thank you so much.
And I just wanna say, your daughter has put my daughter to sleep in the hallway in the stroller,
She
so
loves-
thank you
she
very
loves-
much.
She's the youngest in her family. So she loves
Yeah,
it.
I heard all kind of like things. But thank you. I just wanna add, and it's not a today lever, it's not a this year lever, but I chair the Economic Development and Housing Committee, and we are continually putting, you know, what is just naturally increasing costs on a very small brand list. And we are making it hard for families to locate here and add pupils to our school. At the same time that, you know, we have not really kept up with the need for increasing our housing stock. So while it's not a this year plan, and I only have one member left of natural resources, you're eyeing me suspiciously. You know, I think the legislature also just has to keep reminding itself that one of our biggest levers that we're not using is growing the grant list. And, you know, that taxing second homes has the effect of getting us more revenue and also potentially reducing the number of second homes, which I'm also okay with.
Right.
Yes,
Exactly, and decreasing value.
Yes,
Driving that
right.
down.
The term second homes in this conversation
Right.
includes third, fourth.
That's right, yeah, that's right.
Prime
I have a note,
Minister.
I must mirror Ada from you about that.
Recognizing the income that comes from second homes and second homeowners who add to the tourism income.
Yeah.
And there's an offset somewhere that we've got to calculate when we make any of these larger decisions.
Yeah,
Now, one of the things that, you know, occurs to me partially from this discussion, I mentioned before when we started the discussion that we need to go back to square one on taxation generally, not just on property taxes, but on taxation in which we look at all three major categories of taxes at the same time, rather than tinkering with one without considering the adverse effect that it has on the others. And this has been, again, the discussion that's going on since what, at least 2009. And we've never really done it.
I have some proposals for the income tax, so we can look at
I've got some
that.
proposals too. But one of the things that I wonder, you know, as we talk about equality and equity, that maybe we ought to be thinking about two different taxes or two different sources of taxes for education. One of which might be a local tax in which we deal with individuals on a per capita basis, regardless of who and what they are and where they are in Vermont. And then we deal with individuals on a state tax basis based on the individual characteristics such as ESL or state of poverty, family, or whatever, but we deal with that separately. And it make it a lot easier and a lot more straightforward in terms of how we fund education. That's a discussion not for this bill, but for the larger question.
Is that the block grant model though, or am I not?
It may be the
understanding?
block grant model for every kid as an individual statewide. It might well be something like that.
It's
And
like
then we
a-
deal with the individual circumstances
Right.
with another form of revenue that may be controlled at the state level so that we don't have these unintended
I see what
consequences that we're seeing.
I think that's-
Maintain the equity. Which is, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lady Michelle, has been with me for 2 weeks.
If there's any other information we can provide, our superintendent, does statewide data collection, it's not about Stowe for us, we're looking at this from a statewide.
Yeah, no, we have.
I'll work on it. Can you give us a toll booth? Get a toll, you give me a toll booth during foliage only,
There you go.
and I will,
I dare you to drive up Mountain Road
90%.
Yeah.
on October 12th.
Thank you.
It
I've been
was-
there and done it.
our foliage traffic was
It is-
unbelievable.
it is- And that's good.
Representing yourself.
Thank you again, really appreciate it.
Why'd you get rid of
Thank you. School board.
What's your
One
feedback?
job I said I'd never take.
What's your
I love it.
So,
I love
when you
this
go
stuff.
up, run.